While I was on break the last few weeks, resting and renewing my body and spirit, and frankly, taking a lot of naps, I found myself following, yes, thank you, Liz. I found myself following the monks and their peace walk. I think we have a picture. Do you have that for us? There. Maybe we can dim the lights a wee bit. It's important to see. I want to see if we can see this picture a little bit. That's helpful. So the monks are on their peace walk, and their little dog, Aloka, is walking the journey with them, but they left their monastery in Fort Worth, Texas, to go to Washington, D.C. The walk is dedicated to raising awareness about peace, compassion, and loving kindness. What struck me as I was caught in the doom scroll was why the monks took up this journey. Apparently, when the monks leave the monastery, it is important and we should pay attention. And although the peace walk isn't a protest per se, it is a ringing of the bell of mindfulness, a request to pause, to listen, and reflect deeply on the message of peace, compassion, and loving kindness, and notice that our world is suffering. The peace walk is ringing the bell of justice. Of course, the monks left their monastery long before events of this past week, and it is impossible not to notice how resonant their walk really is, how the message that they carry with them is so urgent and timely. The monks may not consider their walk as an act of protest, but it sure does feel like a radical act of resistance, embodied in every step, every stop, to say hello to the crowds that gathered to greet the monks, every act of compassion that the monks inspire along the way. And of course, Aloka, the peace dog who now has his very own Facebook page and followers, calling us back to our humanity. The bell has rung, and it seems like the perfect time to reflect on the path of liberation and notice the traditions we inherit as Unitarian Universalists that nourish our lives and ground us in purpose, hope, and spiritual clarity about our commitments to building the beloved community. This past year, I have heard good and important questions about the connections between the links between our spiritual lives, our Unitarian Universalist values, and our justice commitments in the wider world. I have heard important questions about the role of politics on Sunday morning and concerns about our role in not only confronting injustice, but speaking truth to power, and emphasizing the world we are building among us here in our UU fellowship and in the wider communities in which we live, which are multiple, many, and varied. What is important to remember in this moment, while the bells are ringing, is that as Unitarian Universalists, we inherit a theological tradition that connects and affirms the connections between faith, morality, and the practical question of how do we live our lives in alignment with our moral commitments and values? What does our faith teach us about the world we are creating and how to live in it? To speak in theological terms is to engage in what Dr. Catherine Keller calls God talk. This framing is helpful. Not only is it a kind of literal translation of the word theology, theo, God, and ology, which means both subject and a kind of speech or conversation. It reminds us that this work is indeed a dialogue. It is a conversation of the deeply human variety. It is relational and always in process. While I understand that the language of God might be uncomfortable and not for everyone, there are expansive ways to frame this. Theologian Paul Tillich points at these questions of theology as questions of ultimate concern. In this way, we can understand theology as conversations about what is most important to us and the moral implications of those questions. Liberation theologies center questions of freedom, justice, oppression, and suffering as the questions of ultimate concern. Liberation theology interrogates sacred texts and centers the teachings of justice and freedom, noticing that not only are we interested in justice and freedom, but God is too. And that is certainly a matter of ultimate concern. This morning, as we kind of wade into the waters of liberation theology, I want to share a few examples to help our conversations as we consider what the questions of ultimate concern are for us as Unitarian Universalists. Black liberation theologian Dr. James Cohen, in his book, God of the Oppressed, published in 1969, considers or reads the Christian gospel as scandalous. The gospel tells the story in which a poor Jewish justice-seeking man is murdered by state violence and then redeemed by a benevolent God. Dr. Cohen summarizes his claim like this, quote, "The scandal is that the gospel means liberation, that this liberation comes to the poor, and that it gives them the strength and the courage to break the conditions of servitude." Published as an articulation and a furthering of the civil rights movement, Dr. Cohen's Theologies situates the divine in the struggle for freedom from oppression. The Christian gospel joins the movement for liberation and freedom, and therefore also offers a critique of systemic injustice and breaks the hold of religious power as a tool of oppression. 2 years later, in 1971, Peruvian philosopher, theologian, and Dominican priest Gustavo Gutierrez published Theology of Liberation as a theological response to the colonial context of South America and the violence, poverty, and injustice of the colonial experience. Gutierrez challenged Catholic social theology to consider, quote, "the preferential option for the poor," end quote. A message that centers the lives and experiences of the most vulnerable. For Gutierrez, the role of the church is to change the material and spiritual conditions of oppression in loving solidarities following Jesus. Riffing off Dr. Cohn, liberation theology is scandalous. It disrupts systemic injustice, empowers those who have suffered. It is transformative, spiritual and material circumstances. It delivers hope, possibility, political power, and agency. The legacy of scandalous theology continues as liberation theology comes alive in womanist, queer, ecological, worker, and disability movements that celebrate the divine emerging from spaces and experiences that redefine the questions of ultimate concern, expanding our understandings of what is sacred and holy. As Unitarian Universalists, we might notice this as widening the circle of love which holds sacred the love that knows no bounds. I love and appreciate this definition of collective liberation from enfleshed. It leans into and welcomes a theology of becoming and process that comes alive again in the lived experiences of people. Quote, collective liberation is a claim that salvation resides in the places where queer and trans liberation, Black and brown and indigenous and people of color liberation, Palestinian liberation, economic liberation, liberation of the earth and all life forms, feminism, womanism, disability justice, abolition, and harm reduction all coalesce. It is global. It is explicitly anti-Christian supremacy, though some come by pathways of Christianity. It is wisdom born from the edges, the fringes, the liminal spaces. It is always evolving and or returning and or emerging thought in relationships to new encounters. It is always incomplete. It's a lot to hold and to feel the expansiveness and to feel the invitation to be drawn into the matrix of collective liberation, remembering, yes, it's true, we all get free together. For the past few months, as part of my professional development commitments, I've been participating in a group out of Vanderbilt Divinity School that is expanding or exploring a new way of imagining liberation and justice in our work as faith leaders. Once a month, I gather with faith leaders of different traditions and varied ministry settings to engage a conversation of ultimate concern. Together, we are imagining liberation in our communities. A question we take on together is, what if we imagine the divine as both a worker and in solidarity with workers? How does our justice work shift and change when we consider this perspective? In Jorge Reiger's theological frame, God is both a worker and in solidarity with workers and their justice-seeking claims that seek to unseat the violences of liberal capitalism that hoard profit over cherishing and celebrating humanity and creation. Reiger encourages us to consider an economy of deep solidarity that allows us to organize and harness our powers. A power is rooted in common and shared experiences across fields of difference, and build social infrastructure that values life, health, safety, flourishing, and belonging for people and the earth. Economies of deep solidarity for us as Unitarian Universalists emerge from an understanding of the sacredness of the interdependence of all life. We are woven in a common destiny. We have a moral and ethical and spiritual commitment to honoring that truth. We cannot escape or deny the beauty and the struggles of living in this moment. We have to name and stay with the horror and the violence against people and the earth, and push against an economy characterized by reckless, unregulated capitalism that privileges profits over people. You'll notice that our congregation is living into this commitment. We are living into deep solidarity. We are nurturing and welcoming more opportunities to strengthen our communities relationally. Our social justice and responsibility teams are engaged in building relationships of care, power, and impact in our community, addressing injustice and offering compassion and love to a hurting world. We continue to open our campus to the community. This year, requests for rentals have increased as people seek safer spaces for their work, events, and projects. We are joining our community in solidarity and acts of justice and delivering relational infrastructure that will make collective liberation possible. And, dare I say, and it's a bit scandalous, I believe it's inevitable. After a week of tragic, heartbreaking news, it's important to remember that we are building a community of love. We are invested in solidarity, care. We have purpose right here in Durango, rooted in our Unitarian Universalist values. We are building a future shaped by those who came before, who dared to imagine freedom and liberation for people and the earth. We embody an inspiring message of love that is scandalous, urgent, and world-changing. As I close my talk this morning, I want to share these words from Renee Good's wife. Quote, "We honor her memory by living her values, rejecting hate and choosing compassion, turning away from fear and pursuing peace, refusing division, and knowing we must come together to build a world where we all come home safe to the people we love." Beloveds, the bells of justice are ringing for peace, compassion, freedom. Let us embody a journey of liberation for people in the earth, resist the tyranny that seeks to divide and silence, and build communities of deep solidarity. We are a people dedicated to building a land of love and justice. We are the people of the love that knows no bounds. May it be so, and blessed be.